Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored tonight to introduce our speaker, Dr. Mikhail Sergeev, who, as his name in Zoom would let you know, Mikhail in Russian, the nickname is Misha. So we had some technical difficulties because of the fact that he's going by Misha tonight. Dr. Sergeev is a fascinating individual who has lived almost 2 lifetimes without even completing a single one of them. The first was in the Soviet Union, and the second one was in the United States. He was born in 1960 in Moscow into a family of Soviet intellectuals in the middle class. And in the 1990s, I think exactly in 1990, he emigrated to this country. He attended the Moscow State Institute of International Relations for his undergraduate education, an institution of higher education that was described by Henry Kissinger as the Harvard of Russia. And he went on in this country to receive degrees, his master's degree, and later a doctor of philosophy with a degree in philosophy of religion from Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. When he entered the United States and began doing the work of a PhD philosopher, his issue areas were primarily Baha'i philosophy, Russian thought, and religion and the arts. And these are fascinating topics that come from a fascinating lifetime of experiences. He's received a number of different awards and accommodations, and he's authored and edited 12 books, including the monograph, The Theory of Religious Cycles, Tradition, Modernity, and the Baha'i Faith, which came out in 2015. Without much further ado, Dr. Sergeev, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Harold, for such an introduction. I would love this guy you described. Look, I'm sorry, I've heard that I have 45 to 90 minutes. I didn't think I would have that much, but I think 45 minutes, I think I can do that. So thank you again for inviting me to the Fireside. The topic of my talk would be about the Soviet Union, the challenge of Soviet atheism, and how and why did I become a Baha'i. I am a formal member of the Baha'i community. Now, let me ask you, do you hear me okay? Is the sound okay? Okay. Yes. Everything is fine. So I would like to have as many questions as possible because I'm really coming from a different planet. I assume no one of those people who are here with us have ever experienced the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was really a different planet. Now, let me tell you right at the outset, I have nothing to do with Mr. Putin. So no hacking, no connection whatsoever. I have been living in the United States for more than 30 years. Now, of course, I traveled to Russia. I was traveling to Russia every year until about 3 years ago or 4 years ago. Now it is very difficult because of the COVID. So without further ado, I will begin with my topic. My topic will not be scholarly, it will be personal, but it will be with some scholarly applications, as I may say, because when I look back at my personal educational and spiritual journey, I'm interested in what were the obstacles I encountered in pursuing my interest in the Baha'i faith. So let me begin with my life in the Soviet Union. I was born in 1960. So I'm a baby boomer, but being the Soviet baby boomer is very different from being an American baby boomer. Being a Russian baby boomer means that I was educated in school and in the university by the early 1980s. 1980s in the Soviet Union were the years of relative stability. It was the best years in the whole Soviet Union. There were no concentration camps. There were no executions. There were no tortures. Of course, there have been dissidents, but if you do not participate openly in political dissent, you will be doing more or less okay by Soviet standards. Now, obviously, the Soviet Union remained a totalitarian country, which meant that there was no freedom of expression. There was no freedom of conscience or religion. There was no freedom of gathering together, demonstrations, and there was no freedom to travel to other countries. In order to travel to other countries, you had to be a member of the Communist Party. You had to have a certain permission to actually cross the border, etc., etc. Now, this situation was especially difficult for those people who were involved in humanities. And I was involved in humanities. My specialty was journalism, and I was interested in literature and philosophy. Now, in terms of the Soviet education, right from the kindergarten, not even from school, from the kindergarten, you were systematically taught the Soviet doctrine. And when I look now at some photos of my son's kindergarten years, the first thing I see is the portrait of Lenin. And then the group of people, young kids, 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, being taught a form of Soviet ideology. So from kindergarten through school, in school you have to be a pioneer, a member of the youth organization, Soviet youth organization. And then you have to be a member of the Komsomol, another stage, another youth organization. You know, being pioneer meant that you were about 10 years old, 12 years old. But when you become, let's say, 15 years old, you are accepted into the Komsomol, which is the name for another youth organization in the Soviet Union. And then the road would lead from Komsomol to the Communist Party. Now, the situation with being accepted into a university in the Soviet Union was also very different from what you experience in United States or Canada or in any other European countries. Not enough universities, not enough good universities. And if you are a boy, a male, and you fail to be accepted into the university right after school, it means that you go to army service, military service for 2 years. And military service in the Soviet Union was pretty much like a concentration camp. You will be tormented. You will be you will not be executed, literally speaking, but you will be subjected to such a rigorous training that if you don't have good health, or if you don't have enough mental stamina, you may break. And 2 years in the Soviet army was a horrible ordeal, especially at that time, since the Soviet Union just initiated the war in Afghanistan. So you may have ended in Afghanistan. Now, I was lucky, well, not lucky, but because of my parents who had connections and I had good grades, I was able to get accepted into this Institute of International Relations. I did not know that it was called the Harvard of the Soviet Union. I'm not sure about that. First of all, I do not know much about Harvard, but I hope that Harvard is not as politicized as was the university where I was studying. The curriculum in this university was so politicized that even the history of Russian literature was studied under from the prism of Soviet ideology. I'm not talking about courses like history of the Communist Party and history of the world, which was also politicized because it was mainly the history of the struggle between the capitalists and the labor people, etc., etc., etc. So the only good knowledge that I got from this institute was the knowledge of languages. Yes, they taught languages extremely well. Because the university where I studied was the main recruiting center for KGB people, for not only KGB, but all different secret services people. And 100% of those graduates who made a good career, either in journalism or in diplomatic service, were some way or another connected with Secret Service. What happened with me was a different story. I was asked to accept the position at the military intelligence. And I did not, I was not a religious person, but I did not want to connect my life to any Secret Service whatsoever, so I refused. I rejected that offer, and after I rejected that offer, I was probably blacklisted. I was not able to find a job for 1.5 years, unemployed, and I was registered at the unemployment agency in the Soviet Union. There was such agency, because if you are not registered, you will be tried and sentenced as a person who refuses to work. These were the rules. And after that, I worked in some newspapers and the TV, radio archives until I completely switched to a different career, working in the theater. So that is the formal, so to say, outline of what was happening with me in my Soviet years. And now let me tell you briefly about the Soviet ideology and what it meant to be a Soviet person of my generation. Now, the thing is that the Soviet Union have risen in the beginning of the 20th century. My grandfather was born in 1910. The October Revolution took place in 1917. So my grandfather remembered those days, but all of his life passed during the Soviet years. So my grandfather was still connected to his parents, who were Orthodox Christians. And my grandfather was baptized because it was customary to baptize a child right after he or she was born into the Orthodox tradition. But my father already was cut off from this tradition altogether. He was not baptized, and he was raised not only a Soviet communist, but also an atheist. Being an atheist was an inalienable part of being the Soviet person. So the ideology was constructed in such a way as to give you a total worldview. Basically, it was a sort of religion, a secular religion that took all of your self-identity. So you were raised with this worldview that covered all of the dimensions of human life. And at the center of this worldview was the idea that there is no afterlife whatsoever. And the only life that we have is the life that is here. And that's why we should strive to make this life better, which was quite illogical for me. Even in school, I could not understand why should I love other people if all of us will die? What is the point of doing that? As one Russian philosopher once noted, human beings have originated from the apes, and that's why we should love each other. So that was the logic of this Soviet education, and from that we had the moral, the moral guidance for the Soviet people and certain political views, meaning one-party system, and certain economic views, meaning the prohibition of private property and private enterprise, and certain social teaching, meaning collective, always collective, not only decision-making, but collective striving toward any goal. So any individual efforts were either suppressed or not regarded as favorable. So I belong to the third generation of those people. And I think the third generation of Soviet people represents a unique generation in the history of humanity. Because not only the Soviet Union was the only atheistic empire in human history, but it also produced, it lasted for 75 years. And it produced 3 generations of people, and it was able to produce us, the third generation of the Soviet people, who were completely cut off from any religious tradition whatsoever. We had no roots. We had parents, I mean, not, of course, not all of us, but I'm talking about myself. My parents were not religious, at least externally and explicitly. We never talked about church or life after death or God or any of those kind of things. The same applied to my grandparents. So religion for me from the beginning was something that I could not understand the purpose of. What is the purpose of the strange institution that has no roots in reality and that serves as an obstacle toward social progress? That was the worldview that I accepted from my school education. I started to question that in the university years, but that was a different story. Now, about my religious heritage and roots. I come from a Jewish Christian tradition. My mother is Jewish. When I came to the United States, and I told this to my Jewish rabbi at temple, we had each person representing his own tradition, teaching his own religion. So the rabbi taught us Judaism, and when I told him that my mother is Jewish, he told me in response that I'm Jewish by the Jewish Galactic law, whether I want this or not. And after a pause, he said, especially if you don't. So by my mother and by my by the parents of my mother, I was Jewish. But my father came from a Russian Orthodox tradition, and with some Protestant, some Protestant interspersions, so some occasional Protestant belongings. I think one of my great-grandfathers was Lutheran, but generally speaking, it was Christianity. And the most interesting thing for me started when my communist ideology was crushed. And it was crushed when I experienced the real life in the university. So everything I was taught did not correspond to what I saw in the university. People envious of each other, people are trying to, how shall I put it, in decent words. You know, back in Moscow, in the university where I was studying, we knew that if you have a group of 3 people, one of them is a snitch. So you always had to be careful about what you say, because whatever you say will be reported, and the implications of that will be unknown. So that was the situation I was in, and you know, after 3 or 4 years in the university, I already said goodbye to my communist ideas. And at this point, I realized that the Soviet ideology actually served one positive purpose for my self-identity. The Soviet ideology being almost like a religion, a substitute for a religion, provided me with an umbrella identity that covered all of my different religious, cultural, educational backgrounds. So being a Soviet person, I could really reconcile myself having a Jewish mother and a Christian father and a Lutheran great-grandfather and people who from my family who immigrated to the United States, etc., etc. So when my Soviet identity collapsed, I immediately faced this question of how I put myself together, back together. And I believe that this question of self-identity also arose for the people in Russia when the Soviet Union collapsed. And back then, in 1980s, in late 1980s, I thought that when the Soviet identity will collapse, they will not able to come back to Orthodox Christianity, because the Soviet Union represented such a huge gap between traditional religion and everything else that this gap will be unsurpassable. So my personal life journey led me to the United States. This is another topic of how I ended up in the United States. Let me just say that I crossed the Soviet border as a tourist, and I entered the American land, crossed the American border as a student, which was not legal, as I was told later in the Russian consulate. But somehow I was not stopped either at the Soviet custom or in the American custom. Actually, in the American custom, we were stopped because we didn't have enough documents. And we missed one very important pink form. It was December 26th of 1990. And my wife was born on December 25th, but we never paid any attention to her birthday, because in Russia, we celebrated the birth of Christ 12 days later because of the different calendar. So we just celebrated her birthday, flew to America, and we are passing the New York custom, and we are stopped and asked this pink form, and I said, I don't know where it is. And the customer says, I cannot allow you to cross the border without pink form. And of course, I'm almost having a stroke, because I spent all of my savings just to buy 3 tickets to New York. And the guy opens my wife's passport and looks at her birthday and exclaims, oh, Christmas baby, welcome to America. And he gives us the temporary visas and let us enter the United States. So that took place in December of 1990, and I came to study religion simply because I wanted to be honest with myself. I realized that I had no religious education altogether. We studied the history of religions in the course that was called Scientific Atheism. I even brought with me the book, the textbook of this course, because I think that in 100 years that will be a rarity, real rarity. So I had no knowledge of religion whatsoever. I couldn't even explain to myself why religion still exists. And I wanted to have some systematic knowledge about that. So in terms of religious studies, I really had a blank slate. Although I was interested in philosophy and religion in Russia and was able to get some books, but not official books. In Russia, we had the so-called samizdat, which is self-publishing. Basically, it was an unofficial underground literature that people would type, let's say, in 4 copies, and then exchange with each other. So I had a network of people with whom I exchanged these books, and I was able to read some of the books in philosophy, like Berdyaev and other philosophers, Western philosophers. I was able to read some books in religion. I was able to read Freud, etc. But my knowledge was very sporadic, not systematic at all. So I was really happy that I was accepted into Temple for religious studies. And when I came to the United States, I started researching different religions because this information was completely absent in the Soviet Union. So let me check out my plan. My main goal in the studies was to understand my personal Soviet and after that American life experience under some coherent worldview. And I started obviously with Judaism, which was the religion of my mother. And here is the thing. Most of my friends were not half-breed, as how we call in Russia people who have dual religious identity. My mother was Jewish, my father was Russian. And people who have this dual religious identity, I think, have a different consciousness and a different perception of culture. Because people who are Russian feel the tradition of Orthodox Christianity behind them. They feel that it fits them, even if they were cut off from this tradition. The same with my friends who were Jewish. When I was in the Soviet Union, I was part of the group, Jewish group, that was preparing to emigrate to Israel. I was studying Hebrew. I did not have an intention to immigrate to Israel, but I was interested in those people. And with both groups, Jews and Christians, I felt like these are my people. But at the same time, I never felt that I completely fit into any of those groups. So that is the psychology of an outsider. And that is not good, psychologically speaking. It has serious disadvantages. However, it also has some advantages, because when you do not fit completely into any of the groups, religious or ethnic or national or political or cultural, then you always are searching for some kind of identity that would serve as an umbrella identity for you. Because otherwise you are always in a state of discontent, inner discontent. Now, back then, I was not able to articulate that. It is now that I actually can articulate that quite clearly, but from the very beginning, when my Soviet identity collapsed, I felt this discontent, and I was very angry at the fact that I lost my Soviet identity, because it actually served its purposes for me, psychological purposes. So I went to Judaism, I went to Christianity, I went to different forms of Christianity, and everywhere it felt great, but not that great, because I was not able to satisfy my inner psychological search for some kind of unification. So the conclusion that I make from this experience is that the current world situation of mass migration, and I think now we are going through another mass migration of people all over the world. I think that this mass migration in short term brings a lot of problems because it creates communities that are not well absorbed into an original culture, especially in Europe. When I was in Europe, I saw the Turkish community in Germany. It was not absorbed into the German culture and could not be absorbed. America absorbs much better and more efficiently, but still, it is a problem when cultures collide and they have no points of dialogue. But in the long term, I think this mass migration will lead to a situation in which we have more and more people of my kind, people who do not belong completely to any tradition because of religious intermarriages, because of national intermarriages, ethnic intermarriages, political intermarriages. When you have those intermarriages in 1 or 2 generations, you have people who cannot come back to their own religion because they understand those religions as, part of them, but still they are looking for something different. So that was the first point and the first conclusion I would make. So obviously, after Judaism and Christianity, I was studying all religions. I'm a very methodical man. Buddhism, Hinduism, etc. Well, Hinduism is a national religion, and I was not from India, but Buddhism is a religion that is very popular in the United States. And it is popular because, I think, because it gives you a religious identity without requiring you to believe in God. So people who would lose their faith in God, but who would still want some kind of community, religious identity, they would probably go either to Buddhism, but it is a rather radical, extreme choice. After all, it is an Eastern religion, or Unitarian Universalists. Unitarian Universalism also gives you this niche of being part of the community, but being completely free to choose your beliefs, whether of God or gods or no God whatsoever. So after all of those searches that lasted for 3, 4, 5 years, an extensive study of religions, finally I came in contact with Baha'is. Actually, the first Baha'i person I met was Robert Stockman at the American Academy of Religion in 1993, I believe. I don't remember how we met. I think he went to Russia and he was interested that I was Russian. And I came to know that he is a Baha'i, and this is the first time I've heard about the Baha'i faith. So here is my second observation about the so-called new converts, or at least what Baha'is call the seekers. I'm teaching religion in the United States now for more than 30 years. Actually, 30 years. I delivered my first lecture in the fall of 1991. So 30 years. And when I discovered Baha'i faith, and I was immediately drawn to this religion, I think because of many factors, some of them being that Baha'i faith was a great substitute for the Soviet identity, however strange this may sound. This is the only religion that would give me this umbrella unity, and it would give me a sense of belonging to Judaism and Christianity at the same time. So I was immediately drawn to this religion, but I was teaching religious studies, and in every course that I taught, the last lecture was about the Baha'i faith. My observation is that, number one, of course, I was teaching in one university. I do not know about other American universities, but in my university in Philadelphia, a very liberal city, most of my students are either atheists or Catholic. And the Catholicism, it turns out, produces either very, very strong Catholics or equally strong anti-Catholics. It turns out that most of my students, number one, never heard of the Baha'i faith. Number two, when I tell them about this religion, they are not immediately drawn to that. And I was trying to understand why. Well, number one, like myself, but for different reasons, my students think of religion as something dangerous. Even without being atheists, they may tend to think of religion as being an oppressive institution, number one. So that's why they do not want to even consider belonging to a religion. They like to study religion for cultural literacy, but they don't want to consider becoming a religious. Number two, many of my students and that I think is true for Americans, are nationalistically oriented. They do not like any idea of global unity, international identity, United Nations. All of those ideas, are associated for them in their minds with a global oppression. Now, my situation was completely different. I came from the Soviet ideology, and the Soviet ideology was a global ideology. It was maybe the first global ideology. The main idea was the international brotherhood of people. So my original impression from the Baha'i faith was just completely different. And this is my third conclusion. The reaction of a person to the first meeting with the Baha'i faith may be very different due to their personal life circumstances and, most importantly, to their personal education. My education was very favorable to the Baha'i faith, however strange that may sound. But when I first encountered the Baha'i faith, I started to have serious doubts, not in the religion, but in myself. Because I said to myself, okay, there were some times when I was attracted to communism and I was a communist. Now I'm attracted to a similar teaching, meaning it is universal brotherhood, etc., all sounds nice. But what if I'm attracted to this because of my previous attraction to a similar teaching? So I started to look for some points of comparison between Baha'i faith and the Soviet Union to see whether they are really similar or they are seriously different. And it took me 3 to 4 years of serious study and work with the texts to realize the differences, because the differences are very serious and are extremely important. But I was coming from a certain tradition that was not allowing me to see the differences, but instead was pointing me to the similarities. So that was another very important milestone personally for me. to be able to analytically compare and contrast both teachings and to see where they are different so that I can be honest before me to actually embrace the teaching. Okay, so now to my next point. When I first came into the contact with Baha'is, I called the Baha'i Center in Philadelphia. No one answered my call. And actually, that was a great experience. Because when you are in the United States, you are bombarded from every corner by people who want to convert you to your religion. And from teaching religious studies, I already knew that certain religions have a questionable reputation, sometimes more questionable, sometimes less questionable. So, for example, Mormonism had a questionable reputation, but it was less questionable than the reputation of Jehovah's Witnesses, for example. But when I would ask about Baha'is, Baha'is would have no reputation. Or if some of my students knew about Baha'is, they would say some good things about those people. So these two factors, I think, for me, were very important. Number one, the fact that Baha'i faith does not have a questionable reputation. I think it is extremely important for people who just come into a contact with something new, not to get a questionable reputation from that, whatever it is, religion or anything else. It is very good, I think, that Baha'is are trying to sustain this good reputation. And one of the ways to sustain this good reputation is through the review system. Now, by the way, for me, who was born and raised in the Soviet Union, the idea that my writings will be reviewed was already very, very questionable. However, the positive side of that, and again, it took me some years to realize that completely. On the other side, I realized that if I express my personal opinion, no one would care. And the most desirable thing for any ex-Soviet person is for no one to care about you, just leave you alone, so that you can develop in the direction you want to develop. So it was very, very good for me to know that I may write certain things and say that this is simply my point, my understanding, and I will be fine. And I think now I practically reversed my stand on the review, because the positive side of the review is that the informational flow that comes about the Baha'i faith is, well, I would say neutral positive, so that it does not create the negative or questionable reputation about this religion. I think personally this is very important. Now let me come to my next point. In the meantime, yes, by the way, no one responded to my call, and again, that was a nice touch, because nobody wants to be converted or pushed around, or when religion is just is put down your throat. So what was happening in Russia in the meantime? To my great surprise, not only my American students, but also my Russian friends did not pay any attention to other religions. And most of them came back to Orthodox Christianity. Also, there was no comeback. They came back to something they never knew. They invented their own form of Orthodox Christianity. And most of those people think they are Christian, but they have never read the Bible. They have no idea what Christ taught. Their actions are actually contrary to what Christ taught. And in Russian tradition of humor, those people are called candle holders, because they come to the church and they hold the candle or kiss the icon. And that was it. Now, that was in the beginning after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but 10, 15 years after that, those people started to be disappointed again with the Orthodox Church, which under Putin became another business. And now, according to statistical data, a lot of people, I think almost up to 80% of believers in Russia are simply believers, but are not associated with any particular religion. Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormonism still have questionable reputation in Russia. Baha'i faith is completely unknown in Russia. In the whole Russia, there are about 10,000 Baha'is, and they do not advertise themselves now because Putin basically became a tyrant when he changed the constitution, and he could suspend or exterminate any religious organization if the Orthodox Church would advise him to do so. Now, as for me, let me see. As for me, it was not enough for me to study religion, to have years of personal thinking about the subject, to investigate other religious movements, etc. For me, it was important to understand in a systematic and desirably comprehensive way my personal cultural experiences, the Soviet and the American experience. So as a result, I came up with my theory of religious cycles, which I developed in the book Theory of Religious Cycles, Tradition, Modernity, and the Baha'i Faith. But I think this is a different story. And for how long have I been talking? I think about 45 years or 45 minutes or so. So I think I should stop and open floors for questions.
Wow, wow. I have to mention that there is a poem in Persian. Some of the friends here, they know that they say, the poet says that if some words comes from the heart, it will sit right in the heart. And your presentation really is very much true in that sense. It came from heart and it really sits. And it reminded myself very much that my father had quite a few friends that they were Baha'is, Persian Baha'is, that they were kicked out because of Soviet Union, Bolshevik Revolution. And these people had a very close relationship with my father, and some of them, they were a speaker in his Fireside, you know. And I just, while you were talking, I said, oh my God, Dr. Kamali was the one of them. He was known as a Kamalov, and he was also had gone to Siberia prison in that sense. On the other hand, you are the second Russian that spoke in this Fireside. Dr. Yuvanisyan, he is in St. Petersburg University and has, Dr. Lawson knows, and other people, I'm sure they know him. He's an amazing individual, and he gave a very, very impressive presentations many, many years ago when he was in the United States with his wife. Yes. So you have really touched my heart in different ways, and I am going to call you back, really. So I'm really happy that you gave us this time and you spoke. And the audience speaks for itself, that how much the people that they are here. We have several speakers that they had already spoken, and also people that they are going to be speakers in this fireside, that they are now in this group and listening. And also we had an email from some people that they wanted to hear you, and because of this vacation, 4th of July, they are not here. And fortunately, we have Alex, and he is really going to take care of that, and is going to be in YouTube, and people, they can hear from you. Alex, back to you.
Thank you.
By the way, sorry to interrupt. Only now I see Yin and Kirsty. Hello, guys. I did not realize you were here. And
I wouldn't have missed it for anything. To hear your experiences, you know, from your life. So it's, yeah, like I say, we wouldn't have missed it for anything.
Thank you. I also see Todd Lawson. Hi,
Dr. Lawson here, Dr. Mark is here, and lots of, Andrea is here, lots of people that it's really a pleasure to see them. And I'm sorry, because of your nickname, we didn't realize that you were here. Yeah, and for a while, I was going to have a heart attack. This will be the first time that we don't have a speaker. Usually, we have a speaker.
That's how my students call me. That's how my students call me, Professor Misha, because they cannot remember my last name. You know.
I see. Well.
I think Jim Barrett has a question.
Yep. In fact, we have a number of questions here. I just want to get to them right before we jump over to Jim. So for our first question, I want to actually toss it over to my parents, Jen and Rob, and you guys can ask your question that you submitted via the chat.
Okay. Misha, thank you so much. This was wonderful and very warm and personal, and left us with lots of questions that we'd love to hear more of, and probably don't have enough time to go well into the evening. But one of the things, it really seems surprising to hear that it took you 4 years to get beyond the perspective of similarities between the Baha'i faith and the Soviet Union worldviews. And could you expand a little bit more on what you see as both as some of the important differences and why you couldn't see them for so long?
Look, you have to remember that I come from a country with 500-year tradition of authoritarian rule. And that produces a different consciousness, a different self-consciousness. That is a problem of intercultural communication. My Russian friends, when they talk to me, they assume that America is operating the same way Russia does. My American friends, when they talk to me, they assume that Russia is operating the same way America does. But although all people are really the same, the countries operate differently. For example, I have a hard time explaining my American students that the Constitution of Russia should not be taken not only seriously, should not be taken at all. You know, whatever is written as a law does not really function as a law. It is an idea that is very difficult to understand by American people, because for Americans, you know, if you have the law, you follow the law. In Russia, you know, the Constitution is here, but the life is on the other side. And life depends on traditional practice, on personal relations, on personal connections, on bribes, etc. And this is part of the way Russia operates. So if you want to do business, never go to Russia, because you will have to bribe everyone Otherwise, you won't be able to operate your business in Russia. Russia is good for arts, culture, literature, etc., but not for things that are associated with the law. So when I came to the United States, I brought with me this baggage. So when Abdul Baha in his will and testament is saying with the strongest of words that no interpretation but my interpretation, that immediately reminds me of Vladimir Lenin and his many works that actually say the same thing. Okay, no interpretation but my interpretation of Marx. In the Soviet context, that had a certain implication. It means that if you really produces your interpretation, you will end up in prison, gulag, etc. So my immediate correlation was that, okay, that sounds very similar. What if this is the same idea behind this? You know, how is practice of this kind of ideology different from what I experienced in the Soviet Union? And that would not take weeks to be dispelled for a person who comes from a different cultural background. Yeah, I hope this answers the question.
Dr. Lawson, did you want to comment?
Well, thank you very much, Professor Misha. This is, I had the same question as the parents of Alex. And because formally one does see many similarities between Soviet ideology and Baha'i teachings. There are morphological similarities. And I'm very grateful to you for your exquisitely honest response to the question, because I think it's very important for us to hear this, from you, someone with your kind of experience. So I just want to thank you for your response.
Thank you. Look, the differences are very subtle, but they are there. You have to see them. For example, the Soviet authorities always stressed centralization. The Soviet state was highly centralized. The Baha'i teaching stresses decentralization, just one thing. In the Soviet state, there was the focus on one-man decision. One person who is the autocrat or the tyrant or the dictator or the general secretary. It was later that he was replaced by the Politburo, the members of the political elite. But it was not a collective decision-making. So Abdul Baha stresses collective decision-making. That is another important difference. The Soviet Union was based on the idea of revolution. And therefore, from the beginning, the Soviet state was a military state, a highly militarized state. Now, Abdul Baha and Baha'i teachings stress the importance of means toward the ends, and they are against revolutions and sedition, etc. And there are other differences. The most difficult question for me personally was the similarity between the organization of the Soviets and the organization of the Baha'i councils or spiritual assemblies. Let me explain what I mean. The Soviets, the idea behind the Soviets was to be democratic, since the representatives in those Soviets supposed to have been democratically elected, but at the same time, those democratically elected people should make their decisions based on consultation based on unanimous decision-making while avoiding an organized dissent. So that was an immediate comparison with the way Baha'is proceed. So you are trying to avoid dissent, you are doing consultative decision-making, and you elect people without organized dissent democratically. So that, for me, for the Soviet person, it was a gigantic red flag. But again, it took years for me to realize that, of course, the Soviets were never democratic. No one was elected. It was all proclaimed, but it was not put in practice. That Baha'is have, I think, the most important instrument of preserving the diversity of the opinions through this position that if you write from your own perspective, you will not be chastised, since this is your own perspective. Now, in the Soviet Union, that was completely different. And because the Soviet Union was never democratic, it became a tyranny, etc., etc. I wrote an article about that where I compared Marxist teaching and Baha'i teachings and communism and Baha'i practice, because for me it was even kind of uncanny that the chronological dates of the founders were practically the same. That was too much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very
And-
much. Oh,
Do you have a follow-up, Todd?
yeah, very briefly. You possibly do not have time to answer this unless it's just a plain no. But I wonder if there is anything in your deep study of the similarities and differences between the Baha'i system and the Soviet system, for lack of a better word, that corresponds to what Baha'is may consider spiritual experience.
Do you mean whether there was anything comparable to spiritual experience in the Soviet Union?
Yes. Whether it has to do with reading the writings of
Yes.
Marx or some form that we could somehow or another compare with the phenomenon of prayer, shall we say?
No.
Zero.
In terms of formal rituals, meaning reading the writings of the founders, yes, we read Marx, Engels, Lenin, etc. In my study in the 80s, we already have not read Stalin because Stalin was out.
Right.
But no, there were no prayers, there were no rituals. It was explicitly atheistic. And even in the 1980s, if you wanted to baptize your child, you would do it in secret, because if let's say you tell someone that your child was baptized, you baptized your child, then you may have trouble in your workplace. In terms of spirituality, we did have our spirituality, but it was unofficial. It mainly it found an outlet through literature and poetry. Unofficial poets who were spreading their verses and songs through cassettes or video cassettes later. They were circulating in self-publishing, and that was our form of spirituality. In terms of the lifestyle, I would say that the lifestyle of my grandparents was much more Christian and Baha'i than the lifestyle of many of my American friends who call themselves Christian. Yes. So it is not one-sided. It is multifaceted.
Thank you. And we do have a number of questions this evening. So I know we're running up to the top of the hour here.
Yeah,
so I wonder if we
have plenty of time.
Perfect. So let's jump back a little bit. So after your college years, do you think that others within your generation similarly felt a loss of identity, not
Yes.
associating with any particular religion and therefore not knowing what to associate with at all?
Yes, I would say most, if not all, of my friends went through the same kind of crisis. But again, those people who, let's say, were Jewish, I had one friend who actually was not Jewish. His father was Jewish. So according to the Jewish law, he was not Jewish formally, but he chose Judaism. Since he was 12, he studied Hebrew. He became a poet who would write in Hebrew, and he immigrated in Israel. Now he is very active in politics there. So that is one example. I have other people who came back to Orthodox Christianity. Some are more honest, some are maybe less self-conscious about that. But I think all of Russia went through this kind of crisis. And personally, I believe that this crisis has not been resolved because Russian Orthodoxy replaced Soviet Marxism. But Russian Orthodox Church was always a pocket church of the state. And now they are regarded as such. All of the patriarchs of Russian Orthodoxy during the Soviet years were KGB agents. And there is no secret about that. Because you cannot make a career anywhere, including the church, unless you are connected with the Secret Service. And the person who is now the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, when he was young, when he graduated from, I don't know what institute from the seminary probably, he was sent to Switzerland, my friends. Being sent to Switzerland, you gotta be connected with KGB. My father was a journalist. He was not a formal worker of the KGB. He was helping them, but the best he could do is Africa. So Switzerland is such a nice place, no doubt about it.
And today, are you in touch with the Baha'i community in Russia? And if so, how are they handling the current state of Russian identity, one focused heavily on nationalism?
Look, I've been in touch with Baha'is in Russia. I know Yulia Ioannessian very well, who lives in St. Petersburg. And I know now some people in Moscow. What I've heard is that they are basically keeping a low profile because you may or may not know, but Jehovah's Witnesses are persecuted in Russia. All of their property have been confiscated. Many of them are in prison because Jehovah's Witnesses are now labeled a terrorist organization. But whatever you think of Jehovah's Witnesses, they are pacifists. You cannot really think of them as being terrorists. So, which tells you that basically the Russian Duma or the Russian Parliament can do whatever they want and may eliminate any religion immediately if they want to. So according to new Russian laws, you cannot perform any religious service or any religious rituals outside of the special building that is designed for that purpose. Now, what this means practically, if you start a Bible study circle in your home, you may get a prison sentence. Think about that. So only in the church. So I would say that Baha'is are keeping very low profile. That's number one. I have one more very interesting story about that. Just a couple of weeks ago or a month ago, I was contacted by a Russian Baha'i who lives in Moscow, Alex Kavetsky. So he actually is an Australian. who lives in Moscow for 30 years. And he read my book, Theory of Religious Cycles, and he told me he wants to translate this book into Russian. So this is the most strange thing that has happened to me. The book that was written by a Russian in the United States in English is going to be translated by an Australian who lives in Russia into a Russian language. So this is a typically Russian story or Jewish story.
Wow. And then do you think for the proliferation of the Baha'i faith, must understandings of communism by the West be rehabilitated? Or do you think that Baha'is living in the West need to absolutely distance themselves from any association or appearance of association with communist principles?
Look, this is a personal view about communism. Personally, I think that Russia at this point was not able to get rid of the communist ideology like the Nazis did after the Second World War. So what Russia is experiencing now is basically a resurgence of Soviet communism under a different disguise. You may call it religious nationalism, or you may call it a postmodern, non-ideological state. But however you call it, Putin is trying to make bridges between his regime and the Soviet Union. The KGB archives are not open. So therefore, I think that Russia has to go through the process of reconciliation with its past. That Russia has to do what the German people have done with Nazism after the Second World War. But when will it happen, I do not know. As for Baha'is, I do not think that Baha'is should associate themselves in any way, shape, or form with the communist movement. Because when the archives are open, people will just be amazed at the brutality of this regime. Hitler is really I don't know, a midget if he's compared with Stalin.
Astounding. And let's back up a little bit here to discuss the question of why should there be religion at all? What was the missing element from state atheism that religion fulfilled and had a role in influencing the population or the local mentality?
Now, is this the question about how the Soviet atheism was able to fill this gap? Or is this the question about the role of religion in general?
Speaking for the questioner, I think it's more that how did religion find a need when the state, or find a place when the state had tried to replace it? It would be akin to somebody giving you just a bottle of pills and saying this is all you need to survive, and on paper it's exactly what you need, mixed with a little water. But how did that compare to true nutrition?
Look, first of all, I don't think we have a real statistical data about how many people believed or disbelieved in God. Formerly, everybody was an atheist, but in the privacy of their homes, they may have practiced some forms of religion, Christianity, Judaism, etc. Number two, the official Soviet doctrine was quite clear. As I said, this is the only life and the only world we have. Make the best of it. The question was why making the best of it? But people tended not to think about that. Because although consciously people may have been atheists, subconsciously they were not. That is my explanation of why people in the Soviet Union survived for 3 generations through world wars and concentration camps. Because Abdul Baha is talking about conscious religiosity and subconscious religiosity. There are people who are externally very religious and they're going to church every day, but deep down they are not so religious. And there are people who are deep down unconsciously are religious, even if they are not conscious of it, even if on the surface of consciousness they are atheists. So I think these gradations are much more complex than we tend to think. As I said, I remember my grandparents, their lifestyle was much more religious and moral than the lifestyle of many of the people I see in the United States, for example, which does not mean that Americans are not religious. I'm just talking about the gradations of faith and different dimensions of faith.
Alex, I wanted to thank Doctor very, very much, really. You have generated so many questions also, which is wonderful, really. That's the purpose of this fireside, is really. Now, because we are at the 9 o'clock now, we are going to ask Dr. Klaudner to have a closing prayer and thank everybody. Please, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I see Jim Barrett,
yes,
who wants to ask a question for a very long time. Maybe we will let him ask the question first.
Okay, that would be the last question.
Go for it.
Thank you so much. I was born in 1946. I'm 75 years old. Went through a long period in this country where there was a tug of war psychologically between America and communism. And now we're in a point where people are being drawn apart by politics and lots of dissemble in this country, a lot of things going on with crime and all of that. I'd like your comments on that, but also you mentioned Rui classes, and what is the power of the Rui classes? What would be the power in Rui?
Look, let me begin with the second one, because I really am not that familiar with the systematic practice of these classes, especially in Russia. I know that they are doing that. I know that they are doing Zoom meetings. I know that they are doing translations and Zoom sessions. But I really do not have an expert knowledge of how stable, serious, and deep this enterprise is taking. Now, the second question was about the situation in the United States.
Yes.
Look, this is my impression is that it's not only the United States. I'm talking to my Russian friends, I'm talking to my European friends. It seems like people are going nuts everywhere. And there are so many symptoms of that. And I think that they are going nuts for various reasons. Economic, social, medical, especially mental health, and spiritual, etc., etc. What do you want from people if you have the situation when all traditional anchors in life are being ruined? You have no idea what will happen to you next day, in a week, or in a month. You cannot sustain a family because of that, because you do not have any certainty about your future. You cannot sustain a family, and that means you cannot fulfill your basic social duty as a woman, as a man, and that impacts your psyche, whether you understand this or not, whether you know this or not. etc., etc., etc. So yes, I observed this in the United States for 30 years. And my strategy is quite simple, frankly. I tell this to my Russian friends. I simply ignore everything and do what I have to do. That's it.
Thanks again. And we are going to stop right here. And now, Rob, are you ready?
Yes, I am, Nasser.
Please.
O thou whose nearness is my wish, whose presence is my hope, whose remembrance is my desire, whose court of glory is my goal, whose abode is my aim, whose name is my healing, whose love is the radiance of my heart, whose service is my highest aspiration. I beseech thee by thy name through which thou hast enabled them that have recognized thee to soar to the sublimest heights of the knowledge of thee, and empowered such as devoutly worship thee, to ascend into the precincts of the court of thy holy favors, to aid me to turn my face toward thy face, to fix mine eyes upon thee, and to speak of thy glory. I am the one, O my Lord, who hath forgotten all else but thee, and turned towards the dayspring of thy grace, who hath forsaken all save thyself in the hope of drawing nigh unto thy court. Behold me then, with mine eyes lifted up toward the seat that shineth with the splendors of the light of thy face. Send down then upon me, O my beloved, that which will enable me to be steadfast in thy cause, so that the doubts of the infidels may not hinder me from turning toward thee. Thou art verily the God of power, the help in peril, the all-glorious, the Almighty.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everybody, really.
Thank you.
Wow. Alex, you're
Thank you for
opening
the-
everybody.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you all for joining us this evening. Now we have reached the point in the evening in which we will